Okay, so first news topic of the week. It was highlighted last week as one of the key points of GDC 2026. It has indeed happened now. Jason Ronald, the VP of Next Generation at Microsoft, has delivered a 36-minute presentation talking about the building for the future of Xbox. And I think it's fair to say that we're still some way off from the arrival of any particular next generation hardware. We're light on details, but we do have some stuff to talk about. Oliver, where do you want to begin on this? Maybe with the nature of the next generation project Helix hardware, because, it's being flagged as like a step change really in gaming. And I think, possibly if you disregard all of the high-end Nvidia stuff that's happening now, it probably is.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, the spec that they've laid out here is kind of interesting. Basically, they're saying that it's configured for the next generation of DirectX. It has new custom AMD SoC. It has next generation AMD FSR, which has separately been pegged as FSR Diamond by, I think, Jack Hyun, which is interesting. New ray regeneration, new kinds of tech there, new multi-frame generation as well, AI multi-frame generation. An order of magnitude leap in RT capability, which follows from what we've heard from various insiders about the state of RDNA5. No major surprise there. Relies on neural texture compression. There's some focus on work graphs, other technologies. There's no specifics here on the configuration as far as I can see. It's basically just a highlight list of technologies. And if you've been paying attention to Microsoft, or if you've been paying attention to Nvidia, or even if you've just read the leaked 2022 document specifying their next generation console plans, I think this looks pretty familiar. It's all about neural rendering, all about ray tracing, all about even some bespoke technologies that Microsoft is interested in, like direct storage, which perhaps there's some mixed adoption there in the PC industry on that front. But overall, I mean, I think the more exciting stuff, which maybe we can talk about in a moment, is the focus on PC, focus on Windows, taking everything they've learned from Xbox, bringing it to Windows, bringing the Xbox experience over to many more PC platforms, all PC platforms, essentially. I think that's very exciting, well, potentially exciting, very newsworthy. But the baseline spec here is something I think I could have guessed, certainly Alex could have guessed reasonably a lot of these elements without having seen the presentation, because it is pretty familiar by this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always been a bit of a question mark of the extent to which RDNA5 was all in on ray tracing and machine learning, and the extent to which the raw performance of those elements would actually translate into gameplay experiences. And I think by talking about an order of magnitude increase in ray tracing performance, that's really interesting, because it does open the door, obviously, to the sort of stuff that we're very, very interested in, like path-traced experiences, etc. Alex, your take?
I did enjoy the Call of Duty man on the project slide, by the way, because
is he path-traced?
No. So there's a lot on here that is interesting. It is actually all following the current public roadmap of the development of the next version of RDNA. Stuff like work graphs being the core focus of it, enhanced ray tracing, although it wasn't very specific on exactly what that means. Unlike, I would say, I mean, it was still not ultra specific, but the Sony talking about PlayStation 6 was slightly more specific in these regards. Texture compression. They talk about neural texture compression and direct storage, but these are, features that we've seen already on the PC side, and, actually less so from AMD and more so from Nvidia and Intel, working on those things with various demos you can download and try out on your machine for yourself. So it does seem like a bit like we are debuting with this Xbox some of the next-gen RDNA features, but you're going to hopefully see them on PC. And I think, like Oliver said, that is perhaps the more interesting part of this presentation by Jason Ronald here, is essentially the next-gen Xbox is more PC-like, and kind of like I argued in the direct Q&A, and like Oliver said there too, it's probably going to be just running those PC games is the way it sounds at the moment, with the shipping just being maybe hosted on the Microsoft Store. And some advantages that will have. But as a part of this push at GDC, we also see that they're going to be bringing the Xbox UI interface deal over to all PCs at some point in the near future, which, as we've seen on the ROG Ally, that maybe if they keep iterating on it, it'll actually be a viable way to use a PC in a home room, in a living room setup, or any kind of setup you want. Hopefully it has other advantages just beyond that. We're still waiting for a bit more details on the advanced shader compilation presentation that was also held at GDC. But in general, it's cool to see that Microsoft is pushing Windows gaming in a more gaming orientated direction. But I still kind of did actually expect a bit more depth from some of the presentation aspects. They talked about better ray tracing performance, and they used the words path tracing, but I would have loved to have heard more about like dense geometry format, which AMD talked about in the past. And it seems like one of the ways they were going to be pushing RDNA to actually, support the larger and more dynamic, high dense geometry that we see in modern games. That is one of the places that previous RDNAs like 2 and 3 have really struggled in, and one of the advantages that Nvidia has with its architecture. So I would have loved to see some more depth in some areas, but this was very high level introduction to their next gen platform, which is a PC. And so I can somewhat excuse, obviously, its lack of depth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting stuff. I mean, I think what's quite interesting here, beyond what Jason Ronald was talking about, is basically the positioning of everything, because AMD is basically at the center of it. You've got AMD, obviously they're producing the hardware. RDNA5 does look very, very promising. Order of magnitude ray tracing improvement. I mean, that could mean any number of things. I mean, what are you comparing against? Is it like for like in terms of clocks? Is it like for like in terms of CU count? Is it Project Helix versus Xbox Series X? We don't really know. What we do know is that basically we're seeing alignment in terms of the future of rendering, which is essentially to catch up with what Nvidia has already started to pioneer. So you've got like AMD collaborating with Sony, Project Amethyst. You've got Microsoft collaborating with AMD with whatever it is they're doing here. It doesn't have any particular stone-like name from what I can tell. But ultimately, I think NVIDIA now is so far ahead in architecting the future of next-generation graphics that basically everybody else is forming a kind of unofficial alliance to come up with an alternative. I think that's the kind of the way I see it at the moment. AMD providing hardware and providing their software expertise. Microsoft weighing in also, trying to dictate standards with a new DirectX. Sony with Project Amethyst bringing alignment with AMD hardware and adding their own expertise to the mix. I think that's quite interesting. That's the way I'm seeing things at the moment. In terms of the Microsoft and the AMD side of things, it is basically almost like a united front against NVIDIA. Not so much in a united front, but basically maybe just to standardize a lot of the stuff that's been happening. So it isn't just NVIDIA exclusive, maybe. I find that quite interesting. We've got to talk about basically what's happening with Windows here. There's, obviously we spent the last Direct and a Q&A show talking about how Xbox and Windows are going to kind of live together. And I think it's pretty obvious at this point, and I don't know how Xbox Series fits in, but it's pretty obvious at this point that Xbox OS as we know it is disappearing. And in actual fact, we've got this quote: "We're taking everything we've learned about building a leading game OS and bringing it directly into Windows for both players and developers." So, Xbox OS, as we know it, as a sort of walled garden on console with, excellent sort of reliability, etc. It's all going to be built into Windows going forward. How that actually works with the console side of things, don't really know. That's going to be quite interesting. How the console, Project Helix, is going to present to the user is also interesting. Will you actually see anything of Windows at all? We don't know. But we do know, I think that's probably something that's worth talking about, Alex, is that Microsoft is looking to basically unify the development process for developers, which basically means that they're developing for Windows at this point, whatever form Windows will take going forward.
Yeah, and just calls back on what I said in the direct Q&A, where if everyone and a lot of publishers and a lot of development houses are saying we want to be PC first in regards to how we're developing something, then it makes most sense to leverage that large audience and also that inertia on the publisher development side and not have people make bespoke Xbox versions anymore. It is very interesting, like you said, though, what does that mean for Series X? Will it kind of get a disgraced ending? Almost kind of like we saw with Xbox One, where there were a lot of games that started at the end of the tail end of the last generation that were getting only ports to PS4, but not to Xbox One and Xbox One X, even though Xbox One X would power through those games, right? We saw that a number of times, Capcom, right? Big publishers were willing to do that. If they don't want developers making bespoke Xbox versions, previous Xbox versions, it kind of logically follows out, I think, from that we may actually see kind of Series X get like a, thrown into the dustbin of history kind of feeling at the end of it. I actually almost imagine that could be a thing that would happen just for the simplicity of it all. But that's a large audience at this point in time to just kind of give away. So maybe it'll be something that eases off in time. But at the moment, I see this as only as a good thing because you really want development efforts to be poured in a way that is, I would say, game developer friendly so that they can do the most with their time possible. And at times in the past, we've seen it, stuff like the Series S version, while it's cool that it exists, it's also meant a lot of development effort from a lot of studios. So, if it gets dropped, I wouldn't be so sad, but I'm just very curious what it actually does mean for the future development of Xbox games in the cross-gen period.
Yeah, I think there's basically the key challenge in terms of this unified development that includes Series X and S is going to be memory management. Memory probably shouldn't be a problem in the short term for developers running on the new console, assuming it's got like over 30 gigs of memory or whatever. But, you've got to manage 16 gigabytes on a Series X and 10 on a Series S. And that's not including the OS reservations there as well. So, yeah, very curious about the long-term or medium-term even fate of the Xbox Series S in particular, because, that's kind of like the feedback that we get all the time is like memory management has been very, very challenging. In terms of the Series X side of things, well, the memory management side of things doesn't really change because people are still going to be developing for PS5, which has, slightly more or slightly less available memory for developers than Series X. So yeah, that's kind of like an interesting question. It wasn't really addressed in that. What about these existing platforms? It does seem to be very forward looking. Oliver, thoughts?
Well, I'm not optimistic about the state of Xbox Series personally, in part because you talk about, developers struggling with Series S. Well, the big problem for developers at the moment is that, Xbox Series is like a 30-odd million console platform, somewhere in that range. Half of them are on Xbox Series S, or even more than half, I think, are on Series S. It's sold a little bit more than Series X, I believe. And Microsoft obviously makes it a requirement to ship on Series S as well as Series X. So you don't have the choice. You don't have the choice of just targeting the easy console that's like very similar to PlayStation 5 in a lot of those respects. I think this is the route that Microsoft... it makes sense that Microsoft is going down this route. I noticed that they canceled their "This is an Xbox" marketing campaign, or seem to have pulled their marketing materials from the "This is an Xbox" marketing campaign. But it still seems like fundamentally the same approach, which is to focus on PC, focus on multi-platform, talk about building for PC, basically trying to build a Windows using Xbox appliance. But exactly how well that works, I'm still very skeptical. I was just playing the other day some Xbox Series X games, and I found the Xbox Series X OS, the Xbox Series OS, to be remarkably stable. I find the games to run really, really well. And then I go over to Windows, and it's just a complete horror show in terms of getting things to work. It's not because part of the problem here is like going forward, I trust that they'll have some baseline of compatibility and that the games will be verified and there'll be some kind of checklist. There'll be something going on that verifies these games work well. but you have so much legacy Windows software, and it's just a total crapshoot in terms of how it works on a controller interface, how that functions. I kind of think they should ship this thing with a keyboard and mouse, honestly, or like a trackpad, wireless trackpad, just to make sure that those kinds of problems are addressable by the user and not just through some kludge where you're, manipulating a cursor using a thumbstick. So I'm just really not terribly optimistic about this whole direction. It makes me sad as someone who has enjoyed Xbox for a long time, and I kind of feel like Microsoft is slowly ripping off the Band-Aid to some degree, and now they've kind of just basically showed their hand, which is this is a PC box, no matter how they want to sell it to their dedicated base of consumers. But on the other hand, I think it makes a lot of sense for them. I think it makes a lot of sense for developers. I'm not opposed to it from that perspective, and if they can nail the landing, I think this thing will be great. But my worry is that they won't, and even the best in the business when it comes to this kind of PC as console model, which is the Steam machine, which is the Steam Deck, I also don't think that's good enough to replicate console experience. Like, I think it's a lot better. I'm still interested in it. I still love my Steam Deck. I'm still very interested in the Steam machine, love Bazite, etc. But I don't think it's good enough. And this has to get to that point and then beyond it considerably before I think gamers will be really satisfied with the system.
Interesting, Alex.
Oh, yeah, I still am waiting to see what this actually all means as a holistic end product when it comes out. Because, we're seeing snippets and bits of it over time, piecemeal kind of doled out by Microsoft in regards to the ROG Ally X and, hints of advanced shader delivery, now these GDC presentations, but we kind of yet to see what it means when it crystallizes into a final form. And I hope it is launched not in a work in progress form, like the ROG Ally X, rather in something where you immediately load up the interface and you go, of course, that's how it works, right? And it just works, and you just start playing games. I don't want it to be like you gotta wait for the launch update or blah, blah, blah. You got to do this, do that. And the other thing, couple months later, it would be bad also to have like a PSSR1 situation where you have like promised software features like MLFG, enhanced ray regeneration, all these things. If they're not there day one, this is also really boring. Yeah. Right? They better be announcing these features and actually have them ready, which I honestly don't know if they're going to be there given the current Redstone stuff. Like, are they really that far ahead internally? I don't know. And you also need developers to start using these things, right? Currently, Redstone implementations have been, very specific to very certain games. And it is not universal. That's also somewhat of an FSR issue in general, FSR4 issue specifically. So I think they really got to make sure that when this box comes out, it comes out like hitting all numbers like it should and doesn't seem to have software weaknesses, which given their track record for the Windows side of things, I'm not completely confident, just like Oliver isn't.
Right. Yeah, so I think basically the way it's all going to work out is that the console will ship with Windows. The extent to which you actually know it's shipping with Windows as we know it is probably going to be sort of like drop back to the background. You probably won't know. It will be a pretty decent interface, I think. There may well be the option to drop back to the Windows desktop. I think my concern there is the same concerns I've expressed in the past. What about security? What about malware? That sort of thing. Windows is such a target there. On the PC side of things, it's pretty much, everything they can take from what they're doing on the Xbox console side of things goes into Windows, makes that a better place to be. I think that's absolutely fine. And, if Windows is causing problems there, well, if you're playing on a PC, you're kind of like, you know what Windows is like already, I think that's the bottom line. Obviously, there's got to be big improvements in Windows. It's to the point now where, every week I've got a new problem with Windows. I'm just going to, if I had the time to nuke my operating system and restart from scratch, I'd do it. Because it's to the point now where I export something from Adobe Premiere, and if I do anything outside of Premiere, the whole system just locks up. It's just utterly, utterly bizarre. So I think, I have got a new PC that I need to get up and running and maybe keep the old one active for as long as I need to port stuff across. But there's just such a negativity around Windows at the moment. Let's talk about some supporter questions here. Some guy person asks, from that GDC presentation, it looks like Project Helix looks like a bunch of Project Amethyst parts slapped together. So a PS6. Do you guys feel that Nvidia and Sony through Project Amethyst are the only two companies actually pushing the forefront of hardware for games? It really seems like AMD doesn't want to spend money or to innovate or update GPU drivers like Nvidia does. They would rather just copy what Nvidia came up with. It also seems that Sony is driving hardware innovation while Microsoft is just along for whatever AMD can make. Do you guys see things differently? I do see things very, very differently because it's just not the way things work. I do see a loose association between those three bodies working for a common purpose, which is to come up with a vision for the future of gaming that is both hardware and software. And I don't think you can discount anybody in terms of innovation there. They just want slightly different things from that common purpose. But it is ultimately, as I said earlier, I think a kind of united drive to compete against Nvidia. Alex?
Yeah. So here, I don't view it the way some guy person says it here. I think the time when that was the case to a degree was with PS5 Pro, the fact that Sony had to roll PSSR on their own, and it's a distinctly different hardware for the way it actually does machine learning. That was more custom and not the direction RDNA4 went in, for example. And I think that was the one a good visible instance from the user-facing perspective where Sony was like, come on, AMD, this is not going quickly enough. We need to do this. And I think, though, for the rest of it, the Project Amethyst stuff was the direction RDNA5 was going to be going anyway.
Sure.
And you could see that running in the background on AMD GPU Open research, which was hinting at a lot of this stuff over years. And they're kind of now bringing stuff that they were previously doing in software on like 7900 XTXs. And it was slow, but it was like research, and they're going to be bringing it now into the hardware phase, where they actually support it better. It'll be running at much lower frame times, and that's kind of how I view RDNA5 as years of research on the software side that they're going to start bringing into the hardware to make it more competitive with what Nvidia does. And it'll also have its own flavors and sauces there, to say the least. It'll do some things differently than we see on Nvidia, and that's actually good for the diversity of DirectX and all these other things. I don't really view it so much so in the way some guy person views it.
Right, yeah. And I think something else which is quite interesting is the whole FSR Diamond thing, which does seem to have just been dropped as a throwaway comment. Sort of, he just tweeted it out. Scenario from Jack Hewitt.
He does that sometimes.
It's just like, yeah, FSR Diamond. Is FSR Diamond compatible with RDNA4? There's talk online from leakers that it's not. I honestly kind of, if that's true, what I'm generally thinking right now about AMD graphics is that RDNA 2.3 probably, are not going to receive too much support. RDNA 4, limited support probably up until RDNA 5 comes around, which I think is the actual brand new start. I think RDNA 5 is kind of like the RDNA 2 of its era, where it just kind of leaves everything else behind. But that's kind of probably not what people want to hear at the moment. Oliver, what do you think?
I hope that's the case. I kind of wonder if
it's just the people with AMD GPUs at the moment that might not be particularly interested.
They are not happy about this.
Well, no, I honestly hope that it's the case that AMD going forward past RDNA 5 has some kind of continuity of service. I'm just seeing no evidence of continuity of service when they break from RDNA 3 to 4, RDNA 4 to 5. NVIDIA is supporting Turing. It's just a crazy divergence. 2018 hardware versus 2027 hardware matched up in terms of feature set, in terms of machine learning, AI upscaling, all these different things. Obviously Turing is not really that fast in DLSS 4.5, but at least it could do it. At least they try to ship it. There are some exceptions, like obviously frame generation, but by and large, those features are shipping. So I think it's just an unfortunate difference. And at the moment, I think that AMD needs to really sort this out, because otherwise it just kind of seems like they're really fixated on the console element of things. And the PC gamers are kind of getting sloppy seconds a little bit, where it's like, okay, well, we developed this technology for PS5, we did this amethyst thing, whatever. And then maybe it's going to ship on the current extant PC GPUs, but not the PC GPUs that you're buying a year ago, or the PC GPUs that are shipping and the SoCs that we're still shipping you that are based on like a 5-year-old AMD GPU IP, like all these different things going into the mix. So it's not a good situation for AMD, and I don't know how anyone can look at this and think like this is really acceptable, especially when their competitors and Intel and Nvidia are much better about supporting their older product.
Yeah, I mean, I am looking.
But again, they're just assuming this is the case. I don't know if this is the case.
Yeah.
Just
Well, I think it's there are a number of fair assumptions in there. I mean, you look at the Mark Cerny presentation with Jack Ewing, that, talking primarily about hardware and how it's moving into a new era, and now you look at what's being shown by Microsoft. Where it is a sort of step change in hardware, and it really does feel like this is kind of like the next big thing from AMD, but it is kind of like almost like a hard reboot of graphics, which is not going to be particularly great for RDNA4 and lower. Got a question here from Carvox. Bonjour, DF crew. I'm curious what the panel's thoughts are on Helix and the Steam Machine as living room devices. Knowing what we know so far about Helix, it seems a lot of the spec will be significant overkill for TVs compared to monitors. Appreciating that it may be an enthusiast box, is the cost and apparent overshot on specs going to leave Microsoft exposed to losing the living room PC to market to Steam? Why would someone with an average television ever need that level of spec? Even the PS6's theoretical specs are pushing the limit, as most consumer televisions aren't even capable of 120 hertz. Still, appreciate your thoughts and have a good week. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. We certainly stirred up a sort of hornet's nest last week, Alex, when we talked about how, two different levels of GPU power can produce what would effectively be the same experience to the human eye. But I think you actually came up with a really good point there, which is that basically the expectation of the user depends on their use case, right? And if Microsoft is aiming to produce hardware that addresses PC and consoles, then basically what you would expect from a PC would be a significantly higher spec. And you would be expecting that user to be wanting to do things like, 4K at 240 hertz, for example, or 165 hertz, or being able to choose their own settings in a way you can't do on console. So, it's a question really of how much does that apply also to the console box, which has to address a TV, and, how much it is an overshoot on specs, but, and of course, it all comes down to price as well.
Yeah, so the overshoot on specs thing, I think that's a scale. I think if you're just thinking that this box or the PS6 will just run everything at 4K 120 is probably unrealistic. I don't think that's going to be the case. And I think Oliver argued for it during our Q&A session last week that, as soon as you turn on path tracing on one of these boxes, in spite of it being the new architecture, there are limitations in bandwidth in there, in caches. They're not going to be the largest chip ever made, like an RTX 5090. There's going to be compromises there. And I think with the comparison to a PC, you may be readily seeing them. And I think developers are going to still be making choices there that they're not going to be just maxing out 4K 120. I think this is going to be like another platform era where developers now with more tools in the box make smart optimization decisions that aren't just run everything at 4K 120. So I don't think they are over-spec'd for even HDMI 2.1, because right now I can turn up settings in a game on a RTX 5090 and not be making 4K 120. Like, I don't think that's a thing. But regarding to differentiation between the boxes, if, like Rich said, Helix has a different kind of branding and ecosystem than the PS6, which all indications lead to that conclusion at the moment, then I would say them focusing on things like MFG and setting your own settings, because there may be a game that could run path tracing on a PS6, but they just don't turn it on for some reason, where, like if you had user control on a theoretical Helix device and there's a PC version that offers it, for some reason you could turn it on. Maybe your performance is poor, but like maybe this is just part of the balance of the equation at the end of the day, how they differentiate the boxes. Less control on one end, but maybe a more polished experience versus, more user control, but potentially a less polished experience. So yeah, I don't think they're over-spec'd though, necessarily.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's interesting, MFG up to 120 hertz, as we know. What we know about MFG at the moment would suggest that's probably not a good idea. But I was thinking about this. First of all, because it actually came up as a comment in one of the articles I wrote on the Digital Foundry website. People were saying, I was sort of suggesting, is PS5 Pro going to get frame generation? And the answer was no, the latency is too high. But actually, if you flipping, let's say your standard is a 60 hertz VSync experience. When you move up to 120 hertz, your input latency goes down. If you turn on VRR, your input latency goes down. And, that in itself may be enough to provide enough of an offset to the additional latency that frame generation would add. And the concept of latency is very, very different on a living room box with a joypad compared to a PC on a PC monitor with a mouse and keyboard. So I think there is some latitude there. Wow. What do you make of this question, Oliver?
Well, I mean, in terms of if they've overshot or not, I don't know. I think there is an argument to say they've overshot just because this thing will probably be expensive, and Microsoft doesn't really have a low-end product. Sony has a low-end product that's called your friend's PlayStation 5. They have a low-end product. You can buy a used PS5. You buy a new PS5. They're not too expensive at the moment, especially when they do sales. But I think Microsoft is in the uncomfortable position of existing in the hardware space with companies that are their partners, and they've always had a bit of an uncomfortable relationship with that. And if you look at the Surface devices, what they've tended to do over time, perhaps to placate those partners, is to target higher end systems, right? So Surface devices tend to be a little bit higher end. Could Magnus, could Helix, whatever you want to call it, be a higher end device, and then Asus, Acer, MSI, whatever, come in at the low end with these PC style boxes that have a lot of the kind of form, maybe most of the function of a Project Helix device, but might sell for $600 and have a more basic SoC or even discrete GPU or whatever that case might be. I think that could definitely be the case. So I think it's important to see the full strategy here, the full kind of rollout of products. But at the moment, I mean, I totally agree with Alex. 4K 120, even 4K 60 with some of these games, these GPUs will be fighting for sure to get there in a lot of these games. I think it'll deliver a good experience, but it'll be challenging. But on the other hand, it's they got to hit a price point, I feel like, and I don't think this is going to hit a price point.
Yeah, my final point on this is that they're still talking about more than one device, right? Which is supporting all of this feature set. So, AMD APUs, I suspect there'll be more than one, i.e. more than one being the console one. I suspect there'll be desktop handheld APUs. That would kind of make sense to me. So it'd be interesting to see where that all leads. AMD graphics cards, of course. Okay. Let's move on to a final question here from KBack. Hi there, Digital Foundrings, ! With Microsoft having confirmed that they plan to begin shipping alpha versions of Project Helix hardware to developers in 2027. Do you think this is confirmation that the 2027 consumer release is now completely off the table? It's looking more likely to be 28 plan for the project. I'm still of the mind at this point that it probably is going to be 2027. And the reason I say that is if you think back to Xbox One X and Xbox Series consoles, dev kits went out on the same year of release. There were earlier ones that went out earlier based on sort of different hardware effectively that was simulating the final thing. But in terms of actual dev kits, I don't know, it does say alpha versions. That could mean anything really. Oliver?
Well, just this information, if I was just to draw from this information, the idea that they're targeting 2027 for alpha hardware suggests to me maybe later than 2027, because alpha hardware in 2027 doesn't even necessarily mean finished, dev test kits or whatever in 2027. It means early dev kits potentially. So that's not too promising, but there is a detail here, which is that Kepler L2 says 2027, says they're still targeting 2027. So my read on this is maybe they're still targeting 2027 internally, but they're leaving the door open to a slip. Maybe that's plausible. Or maybe it's 2028. I don't know. I don't think it's 2029. probably somewhere in the mix there. I'm not too fussed about it either way. But yeah, developers should be able to start working on some kind of pre-production hardware in 2027. That's all we know at the moment.